Hey guys, so this is week four's video on React, and in this video I'm going to go over a small web application that I made here, and this is all purely front end, so only React will be covered in this video. We're going to be going over states, props, and then also event handlers, which was also covered in the discussion slides, so hopefully that you'll see it in action and get a better understanding. So what I have here is just a simple counter. So you can click minus to make the number smaller, plus make the number bigger, and you can reset the counter. So what I have going on here is, first of all, I generated this project with Create React App, and I recommend using it because it makes getting started with React or front-end application much faster. I'll put a link to it in the README of the repository. So yeah, it was generated with that, and you can see here that in this file, index.js, this is the entry point of my application. This is just some boilerplate. All I'm doing is rendering um, my component called counter, and I imported it from the same directory, counter.js. And also react.strict mode is just something to warn you if you're not following like React convention or if using depreciated methods. So you can see that it's just rendering counter on the screen. So counter will house basically all of this. So I have counter.js and then I have number.js. And number.js is simply this card that you see in the middle because you want to make reusable components, or at least components that are abstracted from your main one, so you're not just using one file and it's somewhat easier to understand for other people or even yourself if you're working on it. So in counter.js, um, I'm just going to go over, I guess, from the ground up, the basics of what I have on this page. So you can see that counter is a class component because I have a bunch of logic in here. So I want to use either a class component, or alternatively you can use hooks. But I think when you're starting out, class is easier to understand since I guess you come from something like C++ where classes are commonplace. So you can see here that in my render function, which renders what you see on the screen and therefore what gets rendered in the browser as seen here from counter, um, this is just some styling. This is just the top bar, the title, or whatever. So this is what we care about. These are, um, this is this item in my grid right here. This is the subtract button. This is the card that you see in the middle, the number, and this is the addition button. So you can see here that I have my state initialized, and I have something in my state called number, which is set to 0. And you can see here that no matter what gets rendered on the screen, I always have a prop that gets passed into this number component called number, and all I'm doing is passing in my current um, my current state or number. So anytime the component gets re-rendered or on the initial render, it'll display the number that I have in my state in this little card. And in the card itself, I access that prop using props dot and then the name of it, which I dictated here, called number. So using props dot number, I access the number that gets passed in and I display it in this little middle section right here. And make sure to put, also you'll notice this is a functional component because all I'm doing is simply, displaying information or displaying a component. There's no logic in here, so I'm going to use a functional component. Make sure to put in the parameter props if you want to use props. So it gets passed in prop called number, which is the state in the counter component, and it just displays the current number on the screen. So now for event handlers. You'll see that on both buttons, I have an event handler called onClick. And what I do is pass in a function, either decrease number or increase number. They'll both work the same. So in this case, for decrease number, I pass in the onClick this dot decrease number. So every time I click this button, it's going to call decrease number. And what decrease number does is it takes a state. This is how you change the state. Only use this dot set state. This is very important. Every time you change the state, only use set state. So I'm going to call this dot set state and then specify which part of the state I want to change. So I want to change number, and all I'm going to do is take number and then subtract 1 from it. So, and I'm going to do the same for increase number. So every time I click this button, it'll call decrease number and then the state the number in the state will be decreased by 1. And you'll know that, or you should know that every time you change the state, the component re-renders. So when I click this button, what it's doing is it's changing the state and then it's re-rendering this entire page. And when this page gets re-rendered, this number component also gets re-rendered. And as you remember, we passed in the state of the number with the prop number. So the current or updated number also gets passed in, and that's why it updates in the middle here. So something else you can do, which is what I did with this reset button, is that you can pass in functions as props. So I have a function here called reset counter, and what this does is simply reset the number that I have in here to back to 0, and I pass this into this little card that I have, and I just call the prop the same thing, reset counter, and just pass in this dot reset counter. And you'll notice that I don't have, or for these functions, I don't have like the parentheses here as if I was calling it, just because it's not like an executed function. It's just, I guess, either like a reference or a pointer to this function that I have here so that when it needs to, it can call the function. So I pass it in reset counter, this dot reset counter right here, resets it to 0. And then in this card here, I have another button, this little reset icon button here, and I have the event handler on click, and then I say every time that I click this button, I want to call props.reset counter because I passed it in as a prop called reset counter. So when I click on it, I want to call props.reset counter, which is simply this reset counter here, and that just changes the state back to 0. And something important to note about state is that it's not always guaranteed that you'll automatically, or it's not always guaranteed that the state will update for later execution. So for example, if you have like this.set state blah blah blah, and then I console log like something to do with state here, it's not guaranteed that this will be like the updated version of the state. So what we can do to get around that is use a callback in a this.state function. So anytime anything gets executed here, it's guaranteed that this will be like when the state is updated. And there's not really anything you can do about this. Like it's just all up to how React handles the updating of your application, however their algorithm works. So yeah, and I guess if you want some information about the styling, as I said, I use Material UI for the library. If you want something a little more beginner friendly, I think that Semantic UI or Materialize CSS, I think it's called. Those are more beginner friendly in my opinion. I just have this folder here for the styling because, it's gotta look cool. So hopefully this was useful to you. If you have any questions, just let me know.